Hello and welcome to Guardian Live. I'm Charlotte Higgins, the Chief Culture Writer of The Guardian, and tonight I'll be talking to Carlo Rovelli about his new collection of essays. There are places in the world where rules are less important than kindness. But first, a few words about this Q&A. We're going to be on live for about an hour, or indeed exactly an hour. For the first 30 to 40 minutes, I'm going to be talking to Carlo, and after that, we'll take some questions from you, the audience. Thank you so much, those of you who've sent in questions in advance. There's also a Q&A button on your screen to the right of the window you're looking at. So do send us your questions there, and I'll get to as many as I possibly can. And now to business. Carlo Rovelli is a theoretical physicist, born in Verona, trained in Bologna and Padua. He worked in Italy before working for many years at the University of Pittsburgh. He now heads up the Quantum Gravity Research Group at the University of Aix-Marseille. His work, in very crude terms, and forgive me, Carlo, for this description, which you will correct, sits broadly in the space left by Einstein's theory of relativity on the one hand, and the development of quantum theory on the other. His research on loop quantum gravity works towards bringing together these apparently incompatible theories into a state of coherence. Alongside his distinguished academic publications on quantum gravity, he has, over the last decade, become one of the world's most lucid and compelling communicators on science. His first book, 7 Brief Lessons on Physics, was published in Italy in 2014. It has since been translated into 41 languages and sold over 1 million copies. This was followed by Reality is Not What It Seems and The Order of Time, which this last convincingly explained to a non-scientific audience like myself that time cannot be said in any fundamental sense to pass or flow, indeed has no fundamental existence at all. The book we're going to discuss tonight, though, sees Carlo in a slightly different mode as a public intellectual, a figure who absolutely refuses to accept a hard distinction between science on the one hand and the humanities on the other. There are places in the world where rules are less important than kindness. It's a collection of lucid, brief essays ranging through subjects from Nabokov to Roger Penrose, from black holes to atheism and on to the coronavirus pandemic. It's an absolutely brilliant book, which I urge you to buy for all your friends. I absolutely loved it, and I cannot wait to discuss it with its author. Welcome, Carlo Rovelli.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. It's a pleasure to meet you here and a pleasure to be here with all these people. And thank you for the perfect description of the scientific part of my work also.
Well, it's a tribute to your excellence as a science communicator, Carlo, that I was able to do that, because I think, like a lot of your readers, I gave up physics when I was 13 years old, actually, as soon as I possibly could. And it's been such a joy to be able to partake of the sort of wonderful poetry of your subject through your incredible clarity of description and explanation. So thank you very much for opening my eyes to that world. But I wanted to start by asking you, Carlo, about science in the public sphere, which, you know, your book in a sense is a kind of brilliant example of. Your book, your last book, There Are Places in the World Where Kindness is More Important Than Rules, long title, which I just got slightly wrong, admittedly, sorry chaps, where rules are less important than kindness, I should say.
You got the way you said it is the Italian way. You gave a literal translation of the Italian title, so it was more right than the actual English title.
It must be my Italian lessons coming through. But the work ends, Carlo, with a brief reflection on the COVID-19 pandemic, which I assume you sort of were able to tuck into the book as it went to press. But this year of 2020 has seen, I think, science clearly science come into the public arena as never before. You know, science and politics have become extraordinarily intermingled. Scientists have been on public platforms alongside politicians, and politicians have been making serious decisions based on what they blithely call the science. And I wondered what your reaction as a scientist to this year of this strange mingling of science and politics has been. Has it been good for science?
My reaction has been double. On the one hand, very happy. On the other hand, some worry also. Happy because in the disaster we are going through and the pain and the sufferance, I think the public and the governments, both in very different manners, have focused on how important is science, of course. The governments of the countries that have most neglected what science indicated have regretted that, and then the country has regretted that. I think a good benchmark is to think about Taiwan, which has had for the moment, I think, of the order of 10 people dying in the country. I mean, Taiwan is an open democracy bordering with China, so hit early, and still it could manage. And the vice president of the country, Chen Cheng-yen, is a epidemiologist, and the government has been extraordinarily careful to keep track of what science has been doing, has been saying. However, having said so, I think that there is a big risk of confusion. And I worry when governments say that they want to follow science, because I think that the decisions which societies have to take and still have to take, I mean, we hope that the vaccine is going to clear the situation, but we are still in. And there are very tough decisions which countries are taking. And these decisions are not scientific. Science is what we know about the virus. Science is the ongoing process of knowing more, finding solutions. But it's knowledge and is a tool. The decisions depend on our values, and which are not the same inside the society, because and it's good that it's so. I mean, we're an open society with different values and with competing interests. So negotiating, arbitrating between these interests and try to find the balance between these different values is not something which is the job of science. It's a job of politics in the highest sense of the word politics. To put it very brutally, to some extent, even if it is hard to say, we have to decide between letting more people die or having more people becoming poor. It's not an easy decision. It's a decision that society takes regularly, but it's not a scientific decision. Science at best can say, if you do that, that's what likely outcome. If you do that, that's the likely outcome. But the decision is political. And I'm saying so because I think there is a risk, and I see this happening, that politics tries to hide behind science. And that would be a mistake, I think. When in the past states have used science to justify their decisions, it often got very bad, the situation. I mean, science is our knowledge. Ignoring it, it's a horrendous mistake. We have seen this happening. But the decisions are not scientific. The decisions are political. And that also explains also why individual scientists go public saying different things, because they are citizens and they are different values, not just different opinions into science, it's different values, different ideas. And I think we should not confuse the knowledge of science, which is our best tool, from the hard job of discussing, deciding, and finding common political decisions given our different values and interests.
And what about cases where one can identify politicians actively seeking to undermine trust in science? I'm thinking of President Trump, obviously, and the extraordinarily mixed messages, well, not even mixed messages, but the um, completely irresponsible attitude towards what his own scientific advisors are telling him, and you can see a consequent rise in lack of trust in vaccination, in the blossoming of conspiracy theories about the origins of coronavirus. I mean, how do you think that kind of scenario can be solved? How can we try and dampen down these very damaging beliefs, unscientific beliefs in the origin of the virus, and the lack of trust in vaccination and in science more generally?
I think it has to do with a previous point. It has been horrible, and of course, being in science myself, it's horrible to see people in power denying evidence, and you wonder whether it's just incompetence or dishonesty. And clearly, this kind of not just ignoring, but putting in question scientific knowledge that we do have are extraordinarily damaging for society. But once again, I think that the motivation of those behavior, like those of Trump, are not just sheer being bad, a word that he likes to use. There are some political forces and some political interests that push in that direction, because taking decision that would become reasonable once you take into account the scientific knowledge is damaging for somebody, or is against somebody's values. So once again, I think the discussion is not, oh, come on, science versus Middle Age obscurancy. I think the discussion is political. Why are there people who are so enthusiastic when Trumps go on TV and say something which is completely false? This enthusiasm is politically motivated. Their interests, sometimes even perhaps legitimate interests behind that should be addressed, I think.
And I feel what you're talking about in a way is the sort of notion that science is indivisible from society. It doesn't exist in some kind of platonic realm all on its own. That it's contaminated, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. It is part of humanity. It's part of society, and I'm just going to use that observation to segue into one of the main points of your book, I think, which is very close to my heart, and it's really, as I mentioned in the introduction, this kind of insistence, your absolute insistence that science, poetry, art, the humanities should not be placed separately in boxes and never allowed to speak to each other. You insist that they are part of a similar conversation. But I mean, it's until fairly recently in human history, this wasn't really up for debate. It's only in the last century or so, would you say, that science, the human sciences and the natural sciences, which are all forms of human knowledge, have become bifurcated and in some ways kind of hostile? I'm curious to ask you, and I know that part of your work as an academic is in history of science, and you teach history of science. Why did that happen? What's your theory? And why is it damaging?
Well, yeah, this question goes at the core of what I do in the book. Thank you. I'm not sure I'm capable of answering why it has happened. It certainly has happened, and I fully agree with your diagnosis. And your observation is not something old. It's relatively recent, this breaking between the scientific culture and the humanities. Well, first of all, about my book, it is a dominant theme of my book, but uh, not because I planned that. Because the book, it's actually it was not born from a plan. The book is a collection of writings that cover a decade or more, which appeared mostly in newspapers. So it's a collection of short, relatively simple pieces, which talk about all sorts of things, in all sorts of topics. And it was not my idea to bring them together. I even resisted the idea of bringing them together. Now I'm very happy that this book is out. I did the job of sort of reorganizing, rewriting, and structuring it. And somehow I myself realized, seeing what I've done, talking about the poetry of Dante, politics, literature, and science, of course, because there are also scientific articles, strictly scientific articles that talk about black holes and things like that. And I realize how much, as you say, I keep insisting on that, because it's the way I see the world. I mean, I'm a scientist, but I definitely do not see science as an isolated enterprise from the rest of culture. I think we have a vision of the world, we have a knowledge of the world that evolve, we know things, and we know things through different tools and ways, which include, of course, scientific research, but include music, literature, poetry, history, philosophy. And each of these disciplines, of course, has its own ways, its own methods, its own souls. But they make sense because they are together, they come together in giving us a worldview. And historically, the integration between all that has been always complete. I mean, if I look at the science, I teach history of science, it would have been impossible to have the main scientific advanced steps ahead without an absolutely direct influence of the cultural situation of the ideas that were around in the culture. And this back from at the time of Newton and 100 years ago at the time of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is incomprehensible without the philosophy of the time. And it's also the other way around. I mean, you cannot understand Kant without, nor Milton. You cannot understand Milton without Newton, just before it, and so on and so forth. And so it's a conversation, and it's not just a conversation out there in the academy. It's what makes our worldview, is what grounds how our entire civilization works, because our civilization works on the knowledge, on the ideas we have about the world that come from all these different parts. Now, something has happened, as you say, I don't know, 100 years ago or a little bit more. I'm not capable of making a diagnosis, but certainly some of the reasons have been the specialization because of the complexity of knowledge. Everybody goes its own directions. Certainly an arrogance due to the scientists in the 19th century, due to the extraordinary success of science. I mean, there was a moment in which the European society, in France, in the UK, in other places, was so much being changed by scientific advances that a part of the intellectual community said, okay, that's it. We have science. Who needs else? And some of this attitude is still in the scientific community. I mean, there are colleagues of mine which are on records for saying, okay, we don't need philosophy anymore. Philosophy is just useful or damaging because all possible questions can be solved by science. Which, if I may, it's a stupid statement, really stupid, because it just misunderstands entirely what is the limitation and the strength of different way of thinking. So certainly there's been a reaction against this overconfidence of science, and overconfidence, by the way, that was destroyed by this evolution of science itself, because the moment of maximal confidence of science correspond to the moment in which science itself realized that most of its ideas were wrong. which is the early 20th century, the moment in which, in physics in particular, it was believed that, okay, everything has been solved, and then quantum mechanics came in and relativity came in, and the old ideas were all wrong, literally wrong. I mean, Mercury doesn't go around the sun following the equation of Newton, like everybody thought in the 19th century. So the excessive confidence in itself of science paid back. Science became hard to follow to some extent. I mean, you still, when you read Musil, The Man Without Quality, the man clearly, I mean, the writer, Musil, clearly knows what's going on scientifically during his years. The discussions in his, and in fact, his thesis, his PhD thesis, refers explicitly to all the what's going on in the early quantum mechanics discussions. Nowadays, it's harder, but I guess it's also harder because on the other side of the separation, a good part of the humanity has let science, has forgot science as a. There's something I like to say. I mean, it's horrible to hear a man with a scientific knowledge saying something, oh, I don't care about poetry, I don't care about music, that's not me. I mean, yeah, sure, everybody's free to say, but you miss a part of the... And in fact, people wouldn't appreciate a man like that. And yet, there are a lot of people in humanities who say, oh, I don't know anything about science, I don't know anything about the mathematics, I don't... And I think that's silly, because it's like, you know, in the early modern age, somebody saying, oh, I don't care about Copernicus and discovering that the Earth is not the center of the world. Well, I'm not interested. You should be interested. That's what humanity knows.
One great example of all these disciplines coming together is a great poem that's close to both our hearts, which is Lucretius's great poem on the nature of the universe, De Rerum Natura. Which I was taught as a classicist as a work of poetics and philosophy, largely because I was taught by men who had been trained in poetry and philosophy. But it's also, as you're very good at pointing out, it's also an incredible work of science. And the extraordinary thing about this first century BC Latin poem, epic length poem, is that it's a work of science, and it posits an atomic universe, you know, a millennium before Einstein proved it, which is a kind of remarkable, and it's a remarkable poem. But it strikes me, Carlo, that you're deeply influenced by Lucretius and by his philosophy of Epicureanism. It strikes me that you're rather an Epicurean. You are you believe in a materialist universe. You believe in the preciousness of the life that we're given. You're an atheist, as Lucretius essentially was. Am I right in thinking that you've taken rather a lot from this great Roman poet, come scientist?
Yes, you're completely right. And in fact, I have a passion for Lucretius. It's a great poem. It's a poem about science. I mean, he describes the atomistic, scientific and philosophical reading of the world. It's today we would say naturalism. The reality is for him is as for Democritus. The empty space with atom moving around, and everything is just made by that. But it's also, together with that, it goes a sense of the beauty of all this, a sense of the emotions that are real in this universe of atoms. A sense of the passion of it's a book full of death and emotional death. So what I find it magic is this completely destroys the idea of science as cold. of science as non-human. It's a book full of humanity. And its role for science is immense, because the book had an immense influence on the birth of modern science. A few years ago came out a book about the discovery of Lucretius during the early humanism in sort of 15th century, and the immense influence that the discovery of this book had on the birth of modern science, including Newton, including the appearance of modern atomic theory. And you find direct traces of the influence of Lucretius all the way to Einstein. Now I don't remember. I'm sorry, I don't remember the title of the book of the author, because I'm very bad with it.
The Swerve by
Exactly.
Stephen Greenblatt. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you very much. It's a great book. Perhaps it's exaggerated a little bit, because if you read the book, you have the impression that the modern world was appeared just because that book was found. The book had been lost in the Middle Ages and was found in a German monastery or something like that, by one of the early humanists. So maybe that's exaggerating a little bit, but certainly it recuperates from antiquity I would say a scientific, a naturalistic perspective on the world, in which I recognize myself largely, and I recognize myself. Sorry, just to conclude, precisely because this mixture of poetry, sense of human feelings, emotions, beauty, love, passion, sufferance, which are not denied by a naturalistic scientific view of the world. To the contrary, they're put at the center of our experience.
Well, that's a fabulous way of putting it. Thank you so much, Carlo. Your mention there of Newton reminded me also of something that's very clear from your from the essays in this book, which is the idea of the non-linearity of knowledge, that knowledge does not proceed in a kind of tidy arc or line or graph. There's a beautiful essay in the book about Newton's adventures in alchemy, which of course is alchemy we associate with kind of crazy medieval people trying to achieve gold from base metal, like a form of magic. Not at all something that we would, on the face of it, associate with someone we've come to think of as a sort of arch rationalist, Newton. Can you talk a little bit about Newton and alchemy?
Yes, there's been a big debate some time ago, because the discovery that Newton was so much interested in alchemy is relatively recent. The traditional image of Newton is attached to his main books about dynamics, about universal gravity, about optics. So Newton, the scientist, and in fact Newton is perhaps the greatest scientist ever, because I mean, science is ancient, but what we call modern science really appears with Newton, with mathematics, experiment, total clarity of thinking. So Newton is a model of how we do science. One could exaggerate a little bit, but he has taught all of us how to do science. And yet, at some point, historians discovered in his notes, his notebooks, we have a huge amount of handwritings by him, that he spent most of his life in alchemy, especially the last part of his life, but decades. And the discussion out of it has been quite intriguing, because somebody said, okay, Newton is becoming old, and when we're old, we're stupid, and so he's losing his mind and is going to alchemy. Somebody is saying, oh, you see, I mean, from the anti-scientist corners of the cultural war, somebody said, you see, I mean, this is what really science is. It's just old magicians, and even Newton just confuses everything completely, and a number of similar interpretation. I was very puzzled by all that. Now all these handwritten texts of him are online. An American university, put almost everything online. It's very interesting to plunge into that. So I try to get an idea of what is going on, and I got an extremely simple idea, which is a core of the article which I put, which is just to observe that Newton has studied all sorts of things in his life, has published books, has become super famous. He was the president of the Royal Society, the most important scientific academy in the world. He never published anything on alchemy. And in fact, there are other enterprises that he did. He spent a lot of time trying to reconstruct the chronology of prehistory, using the Bible mostly, and getting to silly results that the world is 4,000 years old. But he never published anything in that domain either. I think this is simply the key. He tried. It's very easy today to see that alchemy was not yet a science. But it was not easy at the time of Newton. And with the same, I would say, perfectly scientific mind, in which he looked into gravity and found the universal gravitation, and said, okay, this is a result, and published a book. He looks into optics, did experiments. I mean, he did things with his own eyes, he did things with light, with prisma, understood something crucial, and published the optics. Great science. And he did calculus and so on. He looked into alchemy and didn't get anything that was satisfying to him, and therefore he did not publish anything. Now, should Newton have seen immediately that was an enterprise that was going to fail? No, of course, because not even a little bit a generation later, chemistry came out, and it came out from alchemy. And in fact, if you look what Newton is doing, it's really proto-chemistry. So in a sense, he was looking into this enormous body of knowledge, which is alchemy, full of magic phrases and mystery, but also or actual procedures to mixing things and having other substances come out. And he was trying to find sort of the thread of all that. He was trying to invent chemistry, which he was almost there, and he failed because even Newton failed. One of my article in the book is how many times Einstein failed and all his mistakes. So here is a completely transparent story. I think he's a great Newton, sort of realizing that there should be a way of creating a science out of this, people mixing substances and doing other substances. Spending a lot of time reading all the books, all the thing, trying himself, taking notes, and not getting into anything that was satisfactory to him, so failing. And I think this is the greatness of scientific thinking. So why is scientific thinking, what is the power of scientific thinking? Realizing when it doesn't work. So it's not that whatever you think is right. It's that whatever you think you're afraid is wrong, and it takes a lot to convince that perhaps it's not wrong. So the knowledge of your own limitations is a core for me of what science is. And, and Newton going into alchemy and not publish anything, I think is the best example of Newton as a scientist.
That's such an interesting answer, and it ties in kind of neatly with some of our audience questions, which I'm now going to start firing at you. And I can tell you, prepare yourself, Carlo. Our audience questions are really tough and really brilliant.
Okay.
I've got some in advance, and they are flowing in as well. But I can see one that links really neatly with what we've just been talking about from Jerry, who says, how do you achieve a balance between confidence in scientific discovery and all those examples from history where the previously accepted theories are shown to be wrong? I mean, I suppose one way of thinking about that question is, how do you carry on with your career in the knowing that your theories of loop quantum gravity may be barking up the wrong tree, as we say?
It is a great question. It is absolutely a great question, and we can interpret in the way you say. I mean, just even personally, your own specific research. How do you achieve a balance between confidence in what you're doing and the awareness that might be wrong? But it can be even take in a more larger sense how science can work with, on the one hand, being confident in its own results. Right? We know that the sun goes around, so the Earth goes around the sun, and not vice versa. We know how to cure pneumonia, and at the same time knowing that our knowledge is questionable. It's wrong. So how does one find a balance between that? I think that the answer it's the key question in a sense. I think that the answer is like we do in our everyday life. There is no perfect methods for knowledge. Science is a lot of good methods for finding more reliable knowledge. But there is no guarantee of certainty in anything. But nevertheless, there are things we know with very large confidence. I know things. I know my name is Carlo. I know that I'm in this city here. I know, and so on and so forth. I have an immense amount of. What do I know with 100% certainty? Nothing, because maybe maybe I'm a butterfly dreaming. But this navigating, this capacity that humans have of navigating, finding the balance between recognizing what is reliable and yet keeping an eye open to the possibility that somewhere in what we know there might be a mistake that if we correct it, we learn better. This is the core of going ahead in knowledge, I think. So the answer is, I don't think there is a method. There's a famous book by a philosopher, Feyerabend. The title is Against Method. But we don't need a perfect method. We need a huge amount of piled up confidence in the number of methods that have proven extraordinarily successful so far.
Interesting. Yes, and you do. There's a very good essay in the book that talks about this idea of confidence, which I commend to our audience. Okay, so I have just a very small question here. And again, this is addressed in a beautiful, really, really beautiful essay in the book, actually, but I will nevertheless ask it. Lee Hogan Carrigan asks, he hopes this isn't an intrusive question, but he's wondering what you feel, Carlo, about God, or the idea of God, or gods, or the divine.
Okay, that's another easy question. Let me try to answer in two steps. Because I take the question seriously. The first one is that I'm definitely an atheist, and I explain why in the book. One book is why I'm an atheist. All right. So I don't believe there's a personal God. I don't believe I'm gonna be alive in some sense after death. I don't believe that there is a person who created the earth and the heavens. I'm definitely an atheist, and in a sort of serene and serene way, both emotionally and also. I don't really have doubts, if I may, to the extent in which we don't have doubts. I mean, it might be that I'm the dream of a butterfly and I'm not real. It might be that there is, but that's the amount of uncertainty I have about God. However, and that's a key point, is a big however, is a huge however. I think that the experience that people have about God and the role that God plays in many people's understanding of the world reflects something important and deep in in their relation to the world. It's far from me that saying that God is a delusion, something silly, something empty. It's something that structures the people and the world vision of people in a way that is obviously meaningful and significant in some sense. And I believe that science has made a mistake to stay away from trying to better understand what is going on. You see, in a sense, we always make this mistake. Let me put it this way. When we say, suppose a person says a sunset is a sun diving in the ocean, right? And then a scientist come in and says, no, come on. I mean, the sun doesn't dive in the ocean. The sun is big, is huge, is there. It doesn't move at all during a day. We are spinning. It's just a perspectival thing and so on. All right. And then you say, okay, so the sunset is an illusion, is delusionary. There is no sunset. So tomorrow there will be no sunset. No, that's stupid. I mean, the sunset is still there. It's just something else. And we always make this mistake. When we sort of realize that a simple screen in our conceptual structure is wrong, we think that it has to be thrown away. No. So I think that saying that God is what many people say, it's a little bit like saying that the sunset is a sun diving in the ocean. I don't believe that at all. But nevertheless, what people are talking about is real. A sunset is real.
Interesting answer. And as I say, Carlo's essay on atheism in the book is really beautiful and very inspiring, and affirms the value of our own short lives in a very moving way. Okay, so here I have a previously submitted question here, which which I'm just going to chuck at you, Carlo.
Oops.
Andrew asks, you mentioned that Heidegger has the opposite worldview to yours. In what way?
In the way, well, first of all, he liked Hitler and he's a Nazi. I'm not, but I don't think this is the question. So let me give a better answer. Let me give it in a slogan. Heidegger, in spite of the break with respect to previous tradition, he's deep in the sort of great German idealism tradition. So for Heisenberg, there is me, I, and whatever is the world is just what is reflected in me. I'm giving a little bit of a cartoon, but that's so the worldview of Heidegger is that there is the what he called Dasein, the being here, which is man, and I should say woman, but I think I would betray Heidegger saying woman. He says man, and I say man in this context. So man, and the world is just what is reflected from a man. You think about the personal experience. I think the world the other way around. I think that the world is, an immense space full of galaxies, and in one of these galaxies there is a little star, and then there is a little planet with a biosphere and some organisms that somehow made up a subject, which is me, reflect the world. So I think of myself as part of nature. Heidegger takes a perspective in which there is my own experience, so to say, I'm always simplifying, from which everything follows. Now, these two perspectives are completely and radically different, and yet, are they so incompatible? Perhaps no, because it's just, it's just like two people coming into a house from different rooms and describing it differently. I think I've read Being in Time, Heidegger main book this summer. it took full summer to use this complicated writing. I totally disagree with his perspective, but I learned a lot, and I think there is a lot of interesting ideas. I don't have time to go into that. So, I mean, I hate his Nazism, I hate his anti-Semitism. He probably would not have been a good friend of mine. I don't think his starting point is the best starting point for understanding the world. I think naturalism is a much more useful starting point, and yet I think he has several interesting things to say, from which I think I've learned a lot.
Very useful and interesting a meditation there on learning from your enemies or your nonsense. I'm just searching here for a question that caught my eye a moment ago, which is about your own work, which was I can't find it, but I can broadly remember I can't find the name. Forgive me, audience member, whose question this is, but it was. The question is really how are you getting on with your own work? You know, how close are you, as it were, to completing your work in loop quantum gravity?
The honest answer is we don't know. My view of the situation is that the problem, as you said, Charlotte, very nice at the beginning. It's sort of combining quantum mechanics with Einstein general relativity and finding a comprehensive theory, which it should be a theory of quantum space-time, of the quantum aspect of space and time. We have a theory. Loop quantum gravity is a theory. It comes in different versions. Within there are many people who work on it. Within the people who work on it, there are debates, discussions, all sort of but there is a theory there with very clear.
Is it even possible for you to very briefly outline what it is, or is that too much for a Guardian Live event?
No, I can try. So first of all, it's a set of equations, and the main sort of outcome of it, or the main prediction of it, what it tells about the world in the simplest possible terms is the following. Quantum mechanics tell us that light that comes to us is made by photons, little grains of light. And general relativity is the theory of the space in which we are immersed. And loop quantum gravity is a quantum theory corresponding to general relativity that tells us that the space in which we're immersed has a granular structure, is also made by grain, by quanta. So there's a mathematics that describes this individual quanta of space. So we're not immersed in a smooth space, we're immersed in a sort of powder of very, very teeny, extraordinarily teeny grains, which do not live in space. They are themselves space. They make up space. And this loop quantum gravity is the mathematics of this quanta of space. How are they made? How they come together, and the dynamics, how they change. And if all goes well, it should allow us to do calculations about early universe, the Big Bang, what happened in the central black holes, and things like that, which we are not able to do so far. The question was, are we done?
Yeah.
Well, we don't know. We don't know, because in science it's not sufficient to write a beautiful theory. You have to test it, and you have to pile up verified predictions. And we don't have any. But there's a lot of work going on black holes, on early universe, in cosmology. So my hope is that before dying, some prediction will be verified, or at least some hints that this is the right direction would come out. I'm confident, let's say 4 days a week, I'm very confident. I'm a little bit more confident now because the competition is a little bit more in difficulty. String theory, which is the main competitor, it's a little bit more in difficulty in the last years because there was no supersymmetry that was predicted by the theory because of other things. So loop quantum gravity is remaining. It's more in a situation in which there are the weaker competitors around. This doesn't prove it right, of course.
The in an indirect way, this does connect with an audience question. And by the way, that question I've just now found was from Oliver Bouchard. So thank you, Oliver, for that question. But I have another question from an anonymous person. Oh no, actually, sorry, from someone called Tim Gray. Thank you, Tim. Which actually touches on, in a strange way, what you've just been talking about. It's asking about how people like Lucretius or Dante intuited scientific truths for which there was no evidence at the time.
Well, there are many ways to get knowledge about the world. The basic way is to carefully observe the world and try to come up with a conceptual structure to understand it. And that's certainly not invented with modern science. It goes back to Aristotle and before. Another way is use mathematics, and certainly that's also is not invented by modern science, because ancient astronomy is it's a very precise and beautiful use of mathematics. Careful measurements were ancient, were made in ancient astronomy. Modern science added tools, especially doing experiments, putting up in the laboratory specific situations to interrogate nature. But we should not think that there's no rational way of getting to knowledge before the modern science. There is. And in fact, many of the ideas on which modern science builds are ancient, and we can trace them to Aristotle, to Democritus, and we find them in Lucretius. And now Dante was a poet, and so this is definitely I wouldn't call Dante a scientist, but Dante was extraordinarily learned. And I think the question refers to the fact that in the book there's one of the articles which tell the story was not me to notice that, was a mathematician some time ago, that in the poem of Dante there is an extraordinary anticipation of one of the great intuition of Einstein. And so the question is, how was it possible? Well, it is possible because the thinking game is the same. I mean, you have some problem and you try to find a way to solve that problem. The problem there is, how can the universe cannot be infinite. We don't believe in an infinite universe. It doesn't make sense. But it cannot have a boundary. It cannot be the end of the universe, the wall, because what's behind it? So could there be a way for something to be finite and without a boundary? Einstein solved that. I mean, in fact, found the solution in his mathematics of his time. But Dante got to the same solution. That's remarkable. And I was very curious about that. And I decided to study the text on which Dante studied, which is his master, Brunetto Latini. So I got hold of the book of Brunetto Latini, his master. And if you read carefully the way what Dante learned, and you think of forgetting Newton, forgetting all our preconceived idea that come from Newton. No? It's not impossible that a person of remarkable intelligence come out with an idea. I mean, of course, it has to be a very great intelligence, but Dante had a great intelligence. I think that's one of the things that characterizes top poetry. I mean, Dante is an immense poet. When you read Dante, when you read Shakespeare, you not only have the beauty of the world, the magic of the sound, the images, the depth of the characters, the situation, the complexity. You also have the sense of a wonderful intelligence that's capable of bringing together different pieces of knowledge and doing something new with it. And that step by Einstein is realizing that the world could be a three-sphere, technically, which is what Einstein did in the early 20th century. It's an example of that, I think. A vision, that's what science is and also art is. Having vision, having new concepts that allow us to think the world better.
I just absolutely love that. I absolutely love that because again, this insistence that poetry and music, as it were, literature are forms of knowledge, are human sciences. Maybe it's the logical positivists who are to blame in this kind of downgrading of literature and other humanities as forms of knowledge. The way you talk, as it were, theoretical physics and poetry come very close together because they are, in a sense, speculative undertakings that start off at least not being provable. Do you think that's fair enough?
Yeah, I think it is fair enough. Logical positivism, the Vienna Circle Carnap played a role and had a gave a great contribution in helping us understand some scientific ways of thinking. They didn't invent science, of course, science existed before, but they clarify some particularly clear way in which science worked. But they clearly failed. And in fact, the later evolution of the philosophy of science that derived from them, I mean, the evolution of analytical philosophy that came out from logical positivism, all the way through Quine, made very clear that the dream of logical positives to sort of get back to a total clarity of language in which you know for sure that what you say makes sense and can be verified, because the idea is only sentences should have a clear meaning, and the meaning exists only if the sentences can be verified. And also later evolution clarified very, very, very clearly, I would say, that that's not the case, because in order to verify a sentence, you need a full conceptual structure around, and that's what is being put in questions. So we don't think in terms of clear-cut observations, the cat is black, okay? No doubt, we all agree, and we have a list of protocol of... We think in a much more complicated way. We have concepts, velocity, cat, blackness, which are vague and make sense in a big game. And in this big game, we keep changing our concepts. When Einstein helps us understanding the world, what he's doing is completely subverting the sense in which what we mean by simultaneity, what we mean by time, what we mean by... So, of course, then you believe Einstein because it comes to a prediction which is right. But the path is the same path as when you read Dostoevsky and you get to understand. You have new ways of thinking of what it means to be human, what it means to have emotion, what it means to have ideas, because it gives you a richer conceptual structure to understand reality.
I'm almost speechless because it's so thrilling to hear you talking in this way, Carlo. Thank you so much. I've just got one last question for you, which I note from my so-called research, which was looking up all of your books on Italian Amazon. I mean, obviously I've done some other research than that, but anyway, I note that you've been very busy this autumn because you've got a new book out in Italy, Helgoland, or in Italian, Helgoland. I presume. Is this book, can you tell us briefly what it's about and whether it's going to be coming our way in English translation?
Yes, the translation is just finished, it's just over, and it should come out in the UK in the early spring. I'm very much looking. It's a very important book for me because a lot of my own work it's about quantum mechanics, and this book is about quantum mechanics. So it's everything I always wanted to say and never dared saying about quantum mechanics. And Helgoland is it's an island. Is the island in the Northern Sea where, in fact, quantum mechanics is discovered. And the book opens with a story of young Heisenberg, 23 years old. This is fantastic. I mean, 23 years old, and he has a key idea on which the quantum mechanics is built. So he's alone on this island, this small island without trees in the Northern Sea. He reads Goethe, climbs in the rocks, and that's calculation and calculation. And then one evening, suddenly things start to work, and he's completely amazed, overwhelmed. He says, like looking at the death of sort of beyond what we see of reality, and is almost scared about that. So in the night, he goes out, he climbs a rock, and waits for the sun coming out, knowing that he has taken an immense step, which is quantum mechanics, perhaps the greatest scientific revolution over. I mean, we haven't digested it yet. So the book is about telling the story, how it was born, what is quantum mechanics, why we're still confused about it, and how I think we should try to get out of this confusion.
That is something wonderful to look forward to. Thank you so much for that taster, Carlo. Meantime, we have an enormous treat in the form of your new book, There Are Places in the World Where Rules Are Less Important Than Kindness, which, as I say, is an absolutely wonderful, just full of brilliant, limpid, short essays that slip down and make us think. And I absolutely recommend this book. Buy it for yourself and for all your friends for Christmas. It's available to buy now. We've come to the end of this hour. Thank you so much, Carlo. It's been an absolute pleasure. I just want to say that Guardian Live Online has more events coming up this year, including with Caitlin Moran, Yanis Varoufakis, and a Q&A with screenwriter Aaron Sorkin. And you can find out more at theguardian.com/GuardianLive. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, for your excellent questions. And thank you most of all to Carlo Rovelli for being with us today. Thank you, Carlo, and everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye. That was wonderful. Thank you very much, Anna.